Evil Dead is one of horror's greatest franchises, giving life to some of the genre's best films, most beloved characters, and creators that are adored by legions of fans. But for decades following Army of Darkness in 1992, it seemed as if Evil Dead and its star Ash Williams were gone forever. But following an unconnected reboot in 2013, it was a TV show of all things that fully brought back the world of Evil Dead. This year marks 10 years since the premiere of Ash vs. Evil Dead, originally debuting on Halloween night of 2015 on the Starz network, and marking the long-awaited return of both Bruce Campbell as Ash Williams and Sam Raimi as director to the Evil Dead franchise. And while there have been more entries into the Evil Dead series in the time since, this is the one true return to the original Evil Dead, with Campbell and Raimi bringing their story back to life across 3 seasons and 30 episodes. So why is it, 7 years after it ended, do I hear next to nobody ever talk about this show? And why, with the franchise being larger than ever, is Ash vs. Evil Dead seemingly irrelevant? Well, to answer those questions, we'll need to go back to the origins of the Starz cable show, unpack how it tried to both move the story of Ash Williams forward while staying true to the roots of the series, the behind-the-scenes drama that broke the show apart, and what its lasting legacy is within a now constantly growing world of the Deadites. This is the story of Ash vs. Evil Dead, the swan song of Ash Williams.
Groovy.
The Evil Dead franchise has been around for more than 4 decades, but for half of its existence, it's been dormant, with Army of Darkness in 1992 and Evil Dead in 2013 spanning a 2-decade gap on the big screen. But that didn't mean the Deadites had completely disappeared from our world. For the most part, Evil Dead lived on through a whole mess of comic books and video games, some fun, some bad, and most having Bruce Campbell's Ash Williams at the center, with Campbell voicing the character in most of the games. But fans only had one question for years: when is there going to be a new Evil Dead movie? While Raimi, Campbell, and producer Rob Tappert stayed connected to the franchise through these various side projects for years due to owning the property, they all essentially moved on to different things after Army of Darkness. Raimi went on to make several more prestigious films in the 90s, and then became a full-on blockbuster director with the Spider-Man films for Sony. Campbell floated back and forth between lead roles in genre films and bit parts in blockbusters. And Tappert was a key producer for Raimi's company Ghost House Pictures. For a long time it seemed as if Evil Dead was, well, dead when it came to movies, with Raimi and Campbell every so often teasing the idea of an Evil Dead 4 with no actual script or production commitment. It didn't help that Army was a financial disappointment when released, its underperformance essentially shutting down the series just as it was growing bigger and more expensive to make. And by the 2000s, the creators were publicly toying with the idea of a full-on remake, which fans were loudly against, until the release of Evil Dead 2013. Produced by Raimi, Campbell, and Tappert, written by Fede Alvarez and Rodo Seguayas, and directed by Alvarez. Now, I won't get too deep in the woods here with the definite article-less Evil Dead. Go and watch my video on it and make sure to let all the ads play and subscribe and also sign up on both my Patreon and membership simultaneously. But the film exists as a sort of redo of the original movie, but not replacing it in the larger canon of the films. And with Evil Dead Rise establishing the existence of 3 versions of the Necronomicon, you could say all these movies and the show coexist. But what's most important to our story today is that Evil Dead 2013 was a hit, and proved that the franchise could still bring in viewers. And pretty soon after, the creative team focused on bringing new life to Evil Dead with a TV show, with Campbell saying, "The movie economics really didn't make sense. I mean, Army of Darkness bombed. The TV concept got kicked around. Funny thing is, by the time we got around to putting our heads into a TV show, it all happened so quickly. Meetings, boom boom boom, zip zap zoop, deal done. Then we're scrambling to start shooting in order to get it on the air by Halloween." Really, Ash vs. Evil Dead was made to give loyal fans everything they'd wanted for years, with Raimi saying, "We want to please the hardcore fans shamelessly. If we do so, it's been a tremendous success. If we don't, there's nowhere to hide. It's been a miserable failure." Raimi also revealed that he and his brother Ivan Raimi, who co-wrote Army of Darkness, had been working on different versions of scripts for Evil Dead 4 when the TV deal moved forward, with a lot of those ideas going into the story for the show. Raimi has since revealed a few of those ideas, like a cross-country road trip with Ash trying to sell a documentary about himself, but my favorite idea is a split timeline story with two Ashes. One with the original ending from Army of Darkness with Ash in a post-apocalyptic world, and the other with the theatrical ending with Ash as a hero in the present, which I find interesting in the context of the show, because there's a lot of playing around with timelines, multiple Ashes, and the ending of Season 3 finally putting Ash back in a post-apocalyptic world, but I digress. On November 10th, 2014, Starz officially ordered Ash vs. Evil Dead to series, with the network having previously worked with Raimi and Tappert as the producers on Spartacus. Of course, it shouldn't be surprising that Raimi is only an executive producer and not actually running the show, with Craig Di Gregorio hired as showrunner. However, Raimi does direct the first episode of the show, and it really has all his hallmark tricks that he established with the original trilogy, and out of every episode, I think Raimi's is the strongest and most exciting on its own. If you only watch one episode, watch that one. As for the show itself, Ash vs. Evil Dead picks up 30 years after the original trilogy, with Ashley J. Williams having not done much with his life, living in trailer parks and working at the value stop as a clerk, and with the Necronomicon stashed away in a trunk for safekeeping. That is until he gets high and reads from the book to impress a girl in a one-night stand. Now, the terrors of the Deadites have been unleashed again, and Ash must rise as a hero once more. But this time, he won't be alone in the fight against evil.
Time to dance!
With his co-workers Kelly Maxwell, played by Dana De Lorenzo, and Pablo Simon Bolivar, played by Ray Santiago, dragged into the fight and becoming their own badass heroes along the way. Each season has its own general arc and recurring cast of characters, if any survive beyond more than a couple episodes. But the main recurring antagonist is Ruby, played by Lucy Lawless, who'd worked with Raimi since he produced Xena Warrior Princess in the 90s. And Ruby is, well, it's much more complicated than it needs to be.
Of course I know what I'm doing. I wrote this book.
Ruby is a demon and part of the long-hinted-at Dark Ones, who created the Necronomicon in ancient times. In Season 1, Ruby has a pretty small role, hunting Ash to get the Book of the Dead back. In Season 2, she's slowly turned into a hero as she loses most of her powers. And in Season 3, Ruby is an alternate timeline version of herself, killing the good one we know and once again trying to gain power and stop the Dark Ones from returning to our world. Like I said, way more complicated than it needs to be, which is strange because most of the stories for each season of Ash vs. Evil Dead are really just excuses to move Ash, Pablo, and Kelly into new scenarios for maximum blood and guts. Season 1 is primarily a road story, with our ghost beaters traveling from town to town to stop the effects of the Necronomicon. Meanwhile, Michigan State Trooper Amanda Fisher, played by Jill Marie Jones, is on the hunt for Ash after the death of her partner, and is helped by the mysterious Ruby, who we eventually find out has been trying to get the Necronomicon back from Ash ever since that fateful night in the cabin. This eventually leads to a showdown at the old cabin, and Ash striking a deal with Ruby to give her the book and let him and his friends live their dream lives in Jacksonville, Florida. Season 2 brings Ash home to the small Midwest town of Elk Grove, Michigan, which he left when the residents accused him of killing everyone in the cabin, nicknaming him Ashy Slashy and setting him on 30 years of running from the past. It's a season-wide arc of Ash facing his old hometown, the ghosts of the past, and old connections, including a past love interest also named Linda, but not that one Linda, played by Michelle Hurd, his old friend Chet, played by Ted Raimi, frequent Shemp's supporting part in the trilogy, and his father Brock, played by Lee Majors. Well, Ruby turns into a hero after losing control of the Necronomicon, and the demon Ball comes to Earth, played by not Brad Dourif, I swear. With Ball killing Pablo and Ash traveling back in time to change the past 30 years ago and save his buddy. And Season 3 stays in Elk Grove with the big reveal that Ash has a long-lost daughter named Brandy, played by Ariel Carver, who he never knew he had. Meanwhile, evil other Ruby gives birth to a baby Ash copy and schemes to manipulate Brandy into being the new prophesied hero. In the big series finale, the Dark Ones return to Earth and summon the monstrous Kandar, forcing Ash into a final showdown that tests the mettle of man. All in all, I'd say that each season is a mixed bag, but there's really no outright bad season, and I would also say that the worst any episode gets is somewhat forgettable. But full disclosure, The Evil Dead franchise is my favorite series. It's the series that got me into horror as a kid being raised by penguins in a sewer, and it's something that I've held close to my heart for many, many years. And of course, we all know that Evil Dead 2 is the greatest movie of all time, ranking just above Predator, Kiki's Delivery Service, Chungking Express, Before Sunset, Shin Gojira, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Rear Window, Tron Legacy, and Jaws. So I guess just having a series that's entertaining enough, and more of that thing I like, is a little underwhelming to me. Of course, living up to a franchise that is so rabidly loved by fans will always be a challenge for any long-delayed sequel in a series. But as we saw with Evil Dead Restart from 2013, it's absolutely possible when a new entry goes with a fresh start and a different tone. But Evil Dead 2013 is a super dark and brutal entry, not just lacking Ash, but also having none of the comedy that's even there with the original. Evil Dead Rise is more in line with the trilogy, adding in some more emotional family connections to balance out the bloodshed. Tonally, Ash vs. Evil Dead is somewhere between Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, having a lot of the splattery fun of 2, but also the bigger scope and increased silliness of Army. Each season of Ash vs. Evil Dead is 10 episodes in length, and what I think really sets it apart in the modern era of prestige and streaming TV is that every episode is half an hour long with commercials. That's a little surprising at first, given that almost every show these days that isn't a sitcom or a cartoon is an hour, and anything made for streaming has no predetermined episode length. But I think it was a smart choice, pushing every episode to be really snappy and fast for the sake of both horror and comedy. And while I have mixed feelings on the show that we'll get into, I think having that brevity is great for the tone and pacing. No episode ever outstays its welcome. The jokes hit and move on fast, and if the premise of an episode isn't working well, it'll be over real soon. The one major negative from that fast pace is that no character or moment ever has enough time to sit and stew like it should, making deaths and new characters feel tossed aside when they should hit harder.
No.
There's some growth to Ash's character over the course of 3 seasons, but it's very much 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Really, it's Pablo and Kelly that have the most growth in the show, being much more like Ash's growth from ordinary whiny guy to prophesied hero. They also have a growing relationship with each other, with Pablo having an unrequited crush on Kelly at first, Kelly coming to like him as a friend and equal, and then the two eventually beginning a romance by the end. As for the characters, I think that one of the best aspects of Ash vs. Evil Dead, and something that I think helps anchor the show when the larger plots and choices don't always work, is that I really like our core group of characters. Of course, it's always great to have Bruce back as Ash, and I'd never want to see anyone else play that part. Here, Ash is at his most loserish, having basically been in a state of arrested development ever since his run-in with the Deadites 3 decades ago, with Campbell describing him as a war vet with PTSD who doesn't want to talk about what happened to him. But instead of staying the hardened badass hero prophesied by the Necronomicon, Ash has no life, no family, no goals. He just floats by on cheap alcohol and one-night stands. It's not really my preferred mode for the character, but it jives with something Raimi has felt about Ash for decades, that he's only really good at one thing, killing Deadites, and is a loser in all other realms. This is sorta hinted at in Army of Darkness with the reveal that Ash is just an S-Mart clerk. But that doesn't have to mean he sucks. Plenty of people work on glamorous jobs, and to me, that reframing of Ash's life outside of this adventure just really highlights the insanity of it all, with Ash essentially becoming his most outsized, heroic self, even when back in the real world. Obviously, Ash is still an untouchable dead-eyed ass-kicker for most of the show, with Bruce having some great heroic moments scattered throughout it. But I feel like there's times where the show makes him a little too much of a coward, running away and letting heaps of people get killed on his watch when he should be doing more. Still, it's great just to get a whole lot of Ash. Easily my favorite protagonist in all of horror, as El Jefe. Essentially the savior of the world who has charisma, goofiness, and deadliness in spades. Outside of Ash, it's really Pablo and Kelly who make up the majority of the show's main cast, as everyone else typically dies within an episode or 2, an issue I'll get back to in a minute. Santiago as Pablo is really fun as the Ash-worshipping support who is in way over his head, only to slowly become a shaman, powered by sorcery and eventually the Necronomicon, with his undying love of Ash as the prophesied El Jefe, spurring him on as essentially the group's punching bag. Still, what I really like is that while Ash is an ignorant jackass who thinks that Pablo is a simpleton, these two really grow to love each other. That's the type of bond that this show is really good at creating, and it helps anchor it through much of its insanity. De Lorenzo as Kelly is the fun and sexy badass who isn't played for sex appeal, but instead becomes the straight man of the group, bouncing off the ridiculousness of Ash and Pablo. At times, she is deadlier than even Ash, an impressive feat given she has no prophecy around her. And while she is the last to buy into this insane world and the Ghost Speeder's schemes, she's a really likable character who's more than just the stick in the mud at times. Outside of them, there's not much to speak of. Amanda is essentially our B-plot character for all of Season 1, with the show having her slowly uncover what's going on with Ash, and sort of be a looming threat that turns into a partner and potential love interest. But she's murdered by an imposter Ash in the 8th episode, and we never speak of this character again for the rest of the show. And when you look at Seasons 2 and 3, you kinda see how unnecessary Amanda was. Pablo and Kelly often get split off from Ash or each other and give the episodes the B-plot against Ash's A-plot, while Season 1 kept the trio together for most of it. And this brings me to one of my biggest critiques of the show. It has no idea what to do with any character outside of Ash, Pablo, Kelly, and eventually Brandy, who we'll get to when we dive into Season 3. Basically, every character that gets introduced is obviously dead meat. Usually dead, turned into a deadite, or turned and dead by the end of the same episode that introduces them. This is especially the case in Season 1 because it's a roadshow. Every episode is a new location, meaning new characters, meaning lots of deaths. Really, it's a little too much like Supernatural with that format. Derogatory. And while Season 2 has some characters that last a little longer, like Chet and Brock and other Linda, it's like the show just can't help itself, and before long, they're dead too.
What is it, Pop?
Something so vital that the fabric of your life may begin.
Except Linda, who just disappears between Seasons 2 and 3. In the long run, it really hurts the show because by the time we get to Season 3, we have no recurring supporting cast with any history, and the show needs to resort to bringing back Pablo's Brujo uncle in a vision, or Brock as a ghost to keep the show going and explain important information to the characters. Yes, this is a horror show, and Evil Dead is all about people getting turned into deadites and meeting grisly ends, but the fates of every side character are so predictable that I basically never bother learning anyone's names, even a pre-famed Samara Weaving. Turning a fairly small and focused film series into an expansive TV show clearly had a lot of challenges for the creative team. 1, how do you make this into a compelling ongoing story? 2, how do you keep this fresh and not just be locked inside a cabin for 5 hours every season? And 3, how good is this actually going to look with a TV budget? Well, the answers are: 1, add in a whole lot of lore around demons and dark ones and Ash as the chosen hero, with our heroes never quite able to stop the deadites and constantly chasing after shifting goalposts. 2, put the characters on the road for Season 1, bring them to a fleshed out town with recurring characters for Season 2, and add in a surprise secret daughter for Season 3. 3, there's some good practical effects and makeup here, especially in the first 2 seasons, with some nice sets and fun action. There's also some not so great CGI blood and clear budgetary restraints for TV, but I'd say it's mostly shot well. I think it's pretty obvious to anyone with a discerning eye that the budget was running low by Season 3, as we're stuck in Elk Grove to reuse the already made sets, most of the episodes happening in the same locations over and over, and there's very few new and interesting monsters, with most episodes having the cast fight regular deadites or Ruby again. Prior to that, there's some pretty cool new additions to the type of monsters you'd expect in an Evil Dead story. Outside of the show, the films are basically just deadites, which are mostly grotesque demon-possessed people, but there's also the occasional winged demon, skeleton army, monstrous tree, and of course the demonic force that possesses people. Here, you've also got Baal, various demonic children of the book, the demon Eligos, really cool effect here, the possessed classic at one point, and the final Kandar the Destroyer. They all help spice things up a bit. Story-wise, it seemed as if Ash vs. Evil Dead only had a handful of plot ideas that they couldn't help but use over and over again over the course of 3 seasons. Pablo and/or Kelly is secretly possessed and evil and needs to be saved. They go back to the old cabin. There's an evil version of Ash they need to fight. Ruby teams up with the Ghost Speeders and then betrays them. Ash gets his hand back and then loses it. The first time this happens, it's fun, but by the third or fourth or fifth time, it's boring. And now that I've rewatched the series a few times in the years since it premiered, it stands out even more. Also, the show seems to lean more and more on nostalgia as it goes along. Due to rights issues, the show couldn't technically reference Army of Darkness in the first season, but when it was all sorted out, more of that film's DNA seeped into the show. In general, staying in Elk Grove has the show become more reference-heavy to the original trilogy, even bringing back Ellen Sandweiss as Ash's dead sister Cheryl for a trip down memory lane. And of course, you couldn't really have an Evil Dead entry without some insane blood and guts, which, thankfully, Starz let the show really go wild with thanks to being a premium cable channel. Limbs are severed, heads are blown up, bodies are torn apart, and our heroes are very often covered in gallons of practical fake blood. But the true standout effect, and maybe the moment this show will be most remembered for, is an encounter with what's come to be known as the colon monster. Episode 2 of Season 2 has probably the funniest, craziest, most inventive, and grossest scene in the entire series, as Ash fights with a Necronomicon-empowered corpse in a morgue, battling with the body's snake-like intestines, getting sucked up into its poopy butt, and having its dangly Prince Alberted dong in his face. And I can't show any of it. But as is the way with all art, that poopy battle royale was indicative of a lot of the behind-the-scenes fighting that had been happening ever since the show began production. What most people didn't realize until Season 2 was over was that most of Ash vs. Evil Dead was marked by a ton of behind-the-scenes fights, specifically between showrunner Craig DiGregorio, who was primarily in charge of developing the story for each season of the show and its day-to-day work, and executive producer Rob Tapert, one of the 3 rights holders of the franchise and much more hands-on with the show than Raimi. According to DiGregorio, he got along well with Raimi and Campbell, but found himself constantly arguing with Tapert about the direction the show should go in, and the types of gags and scenes that should be included in the show.
Oh god, I'm in the butt!
Specifically, DiGregorio noted that he wanted the colon fight in the show, while Tapert was strongly against it. With DiGregorio saying, "I fought for weeks and weeks to get that colon fight in the show, and I thought that was a no-brainer. To me, that is one of the most fun sequences we did on the show in 2 seasons." What I took away from that scene was, and what I think most people would take away from it, is that the show is fun. It's funny. It doesn't take itself seriously. It has legitimate scares and horror, and it has those visual idiosyncrasies of Sam's. And that was all very important to me. It just seemed like we had a very different list of things that were important to us about the show. DiGregorio's vision for the show was often met with Tapert saying, "This is not Evil Dead." And while I clearly see a lot of weaknesses for the show, I think that DiGregorio's vision for it is very clear. But I have no idea what Tapert would have wanted the show to be otherwise. All that infighting fully bubbled over in the Season 2 finale, as Tapert threw out DiGregorio's already agreed upon plan and the finished script for Episode 10, and replaced it with his own demands for the finale. So here's what DiGregorio had planned. With Pablo killed by Ball, Ash becomes desperate to save his friend and use the Necronomicon to go back in time just before he came to the cabin. Cue some character assassination of Professor Nobi as an asshole that feeds innocent students to his wife Henrietta, and a showdown between Ash and the Cellar Monster. All that still happens, but originally, Ash was meant to take the Book of the Dead and run out of the cabin, preventing his younger self from ever experiencing the original trilogy. From there, Ash heads back to Elk Grove and ends up hooking up with a woman we find out is Kelly's mom, rewriting history and turning Kelly into Ash's daughter, with Kelly eventually kidnapped by Ruby and Ball for a cliffhanger that rewrites the Ash-Kelly dynamic. Instead, the finale sees Ash battle Ball in the cabin, eventually killing the demon, saving the day and becoming the hero of Elk Grove, with the alternative evil Ruby still alive. As a season finale, the final version is fine but underwhelming. And it definitely feels like the Season 1 finale all over again, with a 2-episode climactic fight in the cabin happening again. But despite Tapert refusing to turn Kelly into Ash's daughter, something that Campbell was fully on board with, he did it so late that Season 2 is littered with little hints about the coming plot twist.
You're like the daughter I never had.
Essentially making the slow build-up for Kelly this season hit a dead end. After the end of Season 2, DiGregorio officially stepped down as showrunner and was replaced by Battlestar Galactica and Daredevil producer Mark Verheiden for Season 3. And of course, with Tapert so against giving Ash a daughter, the show must have moved in a totally different direction, right?
I'm your pop.
Oh, never mind. Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 3 kicks off its story with the introduction of Candace Barr, former girlfriend and very briefly wife of Ash, and her daughter Brandy, who is quickly revealed to be the daughter Ash never knew he had. Wow. What a coincidence. And with the Evil Again alternate timeline Ruby back and trying to kill Ash and manipulate Brandy to become the new prophesied one, Ash's major storyline here is to take responsibility as a dad, as Candace is, of course, very quickly killed. And overall, I think it's a nice arc for Ash, with him finally gaining a little responsibility and reconnecting with his ghost dad, and I like Carver as Brandy, who starts as a typical teenage girl who doesn't believe Ash's stories, and eventually turns into a new ass kicker. The shift in direction and cast, however, really does throw the balance of the show out of whack. Pablo is here to become the new Brujo Especial and gain more power and control than ever, but he's mostly off to the side as a tool for Ash to use. And poor Kelly, she's got zippy zap to do here. Really cast off as her intended role as Ash's daughter is put on a brand new character. Instead, Kelly is killed by Ruby, possessed by the absolute nothing of a demon character Maya, and then just lays around as a corpse for most of the finale. I mean, Jesus Christ, what a slap in the face to both the character of Kelly and De Lorenzo as an actress. Even with all the behind-the-scenes changes, I don't think Season 3 is bad or anything, but it's got a lot of the same problems. The biggest being that Brandy is the one big shift, keeping us in Elk Grove, probably to save money on sets, but now with the town having no recurring characters or interesting events. You can really feel the budget pinch here as we're constantly in the same locations, on sets, and with very few new interesting enemies. As for Ruby, this character fucking sucks now. Lawless really has nothing to do, and in the second to last episode, she is unceremoniously dementored by the newly arrived Dark Ones and is gone forever. The best things about Season 3 are, like always, our main cast, some good gags, and the relationships between the characters, with the Ash-Brandy father-daughter dynamic actually being pretty good. And it pushes Ash out of being the massive loser he was for a lot of the first few seasons. With the final episode seeing Ash put Brandy, Pablo, and Kelly on the last ride out of town as he fights the massive Kandar the Destroyer, trusting them to carry on the good fight as he faces down certain death. And I think that the final episode of Ash vs. Evil Dead acts as a really strong series finale, having Ash step up as the prophesied hero one final time and saving the world, seemingly at the cost of his own life, only to put him in a post-apocalyptic world where he can live out his fantasies forever. Watching it, it's obvious that Tappert, Raimi, and Campbell saw the writing on the wall, and were pretty sure that Starz was going to cancel the show after Season 3. And they were right. The network officially announced the show had been cancelled on April 20th, 2018, a week before the finale aired. And so, with all those rabid fans and all those big crazy moments that seemed to spread everywhere when a new episode aired, why was Ash vs. Evil Dead cancelled after only 3 seasons? Well, it was just never popular enough, drawing a lot less viewers than other contemporary Starz shows like Spartacus, Black Sails, or Power. And according to Campbell, Ash vs. Evil Dead was the most illegally downloaded show in the US while it was on the air. So yeah, fans showed up to watch, just not in any way that actually made the show popular or helped the network make back the money it spent, which is why you have to pay for things that you care about in order to support it. In the time since, I think the show has gained a much bigger audience as it's gone to Netflix and other services, depending on the ever-changing whims of streaming rights. But a brief call for a revival was met with a confirmation that the show was never coming back. It's strange to think that there's 15 hours of complete Evil Dead entertainment just kind of floating around different streaming services, and actually totaling more than all the other current live-action movies' runtimes combined. And yet it's just sorta evaporated from the consciousness of Evil Dead fans and the horror community altogether. Why is that? Well, being on Starz doesn't help for starters. Nothing against the network, but it never had the viewership of other major cable channels, and was pinning its hopes on this series being the big draw that would finally get more people to sign up for their premium service. It obviously didn't. And according to Nielsen ratings, Ash vs. Evil Dead started with an average of 437,000 same-day viewers with its first season, and shrunk to just 175,000 same-day viewers by the third. That's terrible. The average viewership for a big-name cable TV production, with a whole cast and crew looking to bring it to life, and a lot of expenses needing to go into making every episode possible, shouldn't have the same viewership as a fairly well-performing video on my channel. I mean, fuck me guys, I'm just a dude with a microphone. This is on a whole different level. "We knew the ratings were bad after the end of the second season. We just knew it," said Campbell. "No one knew what Starz was. I would say, hey, we're making that as a TV show. People go, yeah, where can I see it? Starz." And there will be a pause, and then they would go, "What's Starz?" When it dropped on Netflix, people went, "Hey, cool, Netflix is finally doing the Evil Dead show." I'm like, oh my god, it was 3 years too late. What comes next for both Evil Dead and Ash Williams in particular? After the cancellation of the show, Campbell announced that he was officially retiring from the role of Ash, citing his age as limiting what he could do as the character and wanting to move on to new opportunities. But thankfully, for me at least, I love Ash and have never gotten sick of him, that retirement isn't totally official. Campbell returned as the face and voice of Ash in 2022's Evil Dead the Game, which should have been way better and which I don't really care for. Please stop making live-action asymmetrical online-only multiplayer IP games that underwhelm and quickly have their service cut off, please, I'm begging you. But more importantly, announced that same year that talks had begun about a new animated Ash vs. Evil Dead series, with Campbell saying, "You can do the future a lot easier in animation. I still sound like Ash. You know, my voice hasn't been as beat up as my body has been, so I can still do that crap. So I'll still do the video game, and we're already talking about an animated series." There hasn't been much news on the series since, but knowing my luck with the channel, there will be much more information published about a week after I finish making this video. But Campbell has also said that the cartoon won't be directly connected to the finished live-action show. What that means is anyone's guess, but as of now, the Evil Dead franchise is more alive than it's been in decades. With 2023's Evil Dead Rise a big hit, Evil Dead Burn on its way in 2026, and Raimi planning on many more regularly made films all connected with a franchise bible, establishing the interconnected world and lore. Where does Ash fit in all that? Well, a small voice cameo in Rise shows our hero of time trapped in the distant past and still spiraling through the ages. Will he ever grace us with his presence again? Who's to say? But for now, I think the end of Ash vs. Evil Dead is a fitting send-off for Ash Williams. Lost in time, but still kicking ass. Thanks for watching today's video, and it's about time I got back to talking about Evil Dead. You may know that I'm a big Evil Dead fan, and like I talked about in the video, this is the series that got me back into horror way back when. With Army of Darkness being my favorite for a time when I was young because the original scared me so much, but Evil Dead 2 really being my favorite of the franchise, and my favorite horror movie. And I've done videos on the original trilogy, the 2013 film, and Evil Dead Rise, but I'd been putting off Ash vs. Evil Dead for a while. To be honest, I wasn't thrilled about going back and revisiting the series, because it was mostly a lukewarm experience to me by the end when I originally saw it, and rewatches in the time since haven't really done a whole lot for me. And in rewatching the show for this video, I gotta say, I'm still pretty so-so on it. The fact is that I love Evil Dead, and I will rewatch any of those movies over and over and over again and never get sick of them. But I'm never really that interested in going back and watching Ash vs. Evil Dead. And when it just doesn't speak to someone like me who's just crazy about this series, that's kind of saying something. Obviously I don't speak for everybody, but that is my experience of this show. There is some good stuff in here, but I don't think that I would put any other episode besides maybe the pilot as an experience that's worthy to go alongside any of those movies. Maybe you have a different opinion. I'd love to hear what you think about Ash vs. Evil Dead, what you would like to have seen in the 4th season that never happened, and what you would hope as the future for Ash Williams as the Evil Dead franchise is continuing. Like I said, Evil Dead Burn is officially announced for 2026, and there's no information about it right now, but obviously I'm excited. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a patron or member, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video, and exclusive member and patron-only reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves, and hail into the king, baby.